everyone, and welcome back to Autocrat. Today is episode 15, or the Greek Noah.
Yes, today's episode is all about Deucalion and Pyrrha. I believe I've mentioned those names in a previous episode, right?
You have.
Mostly in connection to Prometheus, who was the hero of our story a while ago.
Exactly.
Well, this time we're going to be focusing on these two individuals. We'll get to exactly who they are in a moment, but we'll be also looking at a great flood story, Hellenistic style.
Nice.
You looking forward to that?
Yes, I am. Are you?
Yeah? So let's get into it. As I said, we're going to be concerning ourselves with two individuals called Deucalion and Pyrrha. Now, in the catalogue of women, it is noted that Deucalion is the son of Prometheus, so we definitely have his father nailed down.
So he managed to have a kid before being attached to a mountain.
Either before or after, I'm not entirely sure when it happens, there's no chronology.
Let's say before.
Yeah. However, what is more in question is who Deucalion's mother is, because I've seen different versions listing 3 different possibilities. If you look on Wikipedia at who his mum is, you will get 3 different theories, as I said, but there will be 2 sources supporting each. Hesiod says that his mother was someone called Pronoia. So basically what we get is that there are 3 people who could be involved: Clymene, Hesione, or Pronoia.
Mm-hmm.
Now Clymene, if you remember, is his mother.
And she's the one who has beautiful feet.
She's the one who has beautiful feet that the texts keep coming back to. Yeah, she is. But she's also the mother of Prometheus, so according to Theory 1, he had a child with his own mum.
Not gross at all.
No, not really. The second theory is Hesione, and this is the sister of Clymene, and therefore the maternal aunt of Prometheus.
So either he had a kid with his aunt or with his mother.
Yes. The third option, Pronoia, is in some sources not listed as anything else, just Pronoia, no context given, so a third individual. But the website Theoi drew my attention to the fact that Pronoia is also an epithet of Hesione. So, we've seen things like, for example, Zeus Capitolinus or Jupiter Capitolinus in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is Hesione Pronoia. So the 2 theories we're going to be going with is that it's either Clymene or Hesione who is the mother of Deucalion. So is there one you prefer?
Probably the one that involves the less familial relationship.
Yes, so are we saying Hesione is the mother of Deucalion completely arbitrarily for this episode?
Sure.
Perfect, so that's who Deucalion is. Now, Pyrrha is the daughter of Epimetheus and Pandora, who we discussed last episode. This makes Pyrrha the cousin of Deucalion, because Epimetheus and Prometheus are brothers.
Alright. We'll have to draw that tree again at some point.
We'll have to draw that tree, and when we do, it'll be up on our website, because we've got the early stages of the Greek gods covered so far, but not the later ones. So, we've got Deucalion, we've got Pyrrha, their cousins, and children of Prometheus and Epimetheus, respectively. However, they also have some children, who I believe we'll be coming back to in a bit more detail later in the episode, because they're relevant to the Greeks themselves as a people. Specifically, this is their child Helen, spelt with 2 N's, and you may know that Greeks call themselves Hellenes, and the period of Greek history where the successors to Alexander dominate is the Hellenistic period. Well, this is where that name comes from, according to the Greeks themselves. They also had a daughter Pandora, arguably Pandora II, who had a son with Zeus called Gricus.
Okay.
So again, a lot of familial interrelation going on here, given that Prometheus was also the cousin of Zeus. Deucalion also had a daughter called Thylia, who again had a child with Zeus called Macedon and one called Magnes, and it is apparently from this son Macedon that the region of Macedonia takes its name.
Okay, that's interesting.
Greek myths like assigning names to individuals, it seems. Anyway, that's enough for now about the family tree. Let's get into the main myth, shall we?
Yes.
Now, we've covered the creation of mankind under Prometheus before, and the first part of its existence was a golden age of sorts, and supposedly this was when the world was still under the jurisdiction of Kronos, although, as we've seen, Prometheus created humans when Zeus was in charge, so the timeline is a little bit iffy in different versions. The Silver Age then followed it, and apparently this was after the seasons had started, which we saw under Demeter in episode 12. The Third Age was the Brass Age, and violence became predominant at this point, so we start to see an erosion of everything that's good in society, but the darkest time was supposedly the Age of Iron, when humans stopped worshipping the gods and turned to violence, lawlessness, and terrible acts. A modern anthology of mythology in general, which covers Greek mythology specifically, by Donna Rosenberg, includes the story of how Zeus wanted to see all of this for himself, and so he disguised himself as a human and took to the earth.
Did he now?
Yep. He didn't find any kind people on his travels, but kept going, thinking he would surely eventually stumble across someone kind, around the next corner.
There must be someone.
Yeah, please, someone, anyone, redeem yourselves. He eventually came across an individual called Lycaon, the king of Arcadia. Now, Lycaon accosted the stranger and decided to test if this really was Zeus, because in the story Zeus reveals himself, and how he does this is that he served up a meal for Zeus in his honour. However, this meal included human meat.
Why would he do that? How would that taste, Zeus?
I'm assuming that only Zeus would have known or something similar. The version by Rosenberg doesn't really elaborate on how exactly this test works. But all you really need to know is that there is human meat being served at a banquet in honour of Zeus. The story specifically makes a point of saying that none of the Olympians will put up with this, with the exception of Artemis. I don't know why Artemis is more into human sacrifice than anyone else, but
maybe it's because they weren't supposed to harm humans as gods. They're supposed to oversee them and to serve meat to Zeus when he wanted to see if there was any nice human might mean, well, if he's serving me meat, he's not a nice human because he may have killed those humans.
I suppose so. I'm not sure why, though, from a ritual point of view, Artemis is specifically listed as being okay with human sacrifice.
Maybe Artemis is a bit weird.
I have no idea. The story doesn't elaborate, it just brings it up as a side point. Perhaps understandably, Zeus became livid at this particular transgression and transformed Lycaon into a wolf, with the Great Hall erupting into flames alongside there being an ear-splitting noise. Zeus became so angry about all of this that he decided to just erase humanity.
That seems like a tiny bit of an overreaction.
I guess it's like when your computer isn't working and you decide just to power everything down and restart it. This isn't working, let's try version 2 of the program.
Let's do it.
However, he wasn't sure about which exact method of apocalypse to use, so he asked the other gods for advice. So we get a meeting and some fun world building at this point from Ovid in his Metamorphoses. This is because apparently the Milky Way is the road to Zeus's home. This might contradict our story a little bit later on because, well, we later see the Milky Way being created when Heracles is around and he's way down the line from our perspective, but it doesn't really matter, these myths contradict each other, let's move on. Zeus's palace is, I believe, at the end of it, although from what I remember the wording is a little bit iffy, and less mighty gods have residences nearby. Now, Zeus said he'd never been more worried for the safety of creation, so he's asking the other gods, what can I do to get rid of humanity, how exactly do I go about it?
Lightning bolts!
Yes, someone did first suggest lightning bolts. Zeus liked this idea and immediately pulled up a bolt, so probably thinking, brilliant, let's do it, but was then stopped from this impulsive action when it was pointed out this could also burn his own home down. As I assume the homes of the gods are as prone to fire outbreaks as anywhere else, so throwing a lightning bolt down in the middle of it might not be the smartest idea. Eventually, they decided just to flood the world. That seems simpler maybe, or more accessible, or in any case less prone to fire hazards. The wind brought all the clouds together and Poseidon commanded the sea to wash over everything. When this happened, humans stopped fighting and fled to the mountains in fear. I suppose there is nothing to bring people together like a world-ending crisis. They tried to climb into trees and survive in little boats. However, the water kept on climbing and eventually got them all. Everything was underwater except for Mount Parnassus. We haven't really covered Mount Parnassus before, have we?
No, we haven't.
So it's worth going into a little bit of detail of what is this random mountain. It's close to Delphi, which would make sense in the context of later in our story Delphi will appear, and it's supposed to have 2 summits and is where Apollo transported the Muses to. So it's part of something called the Pindus Mountains, and if you want a bit of a location, it's about 75 kilometers to the northwest of Athens, according to what I could make out on maps. Parnassus is shorter than both Ararat, which in biblical tradition is where the Ark came to rest during the 150 days the water was going down after the flood, and Everest, so if we're going off literal height, I suppose both of those would still have been above the water.
Okay.
Then again, Apollodorus' version says only Greece was flooded, and I suppose to the ancient Greeks that's all that really mattered anyway.
Yeah.
They weren't concerned about whether the Tibetan highlands were being flooded or not. Anyway, back to Mount Parnassus. So, if you can, zoom in on Mount Parnassus for me a little bit.
Yeah.
Yep, wider, expand. Good. Have you got it pictured in your mind?
Sure.
2 summit mountain? Perfect. Well, there are 2 people clinging on to safety there and to life, and these people are Deucalion and Pyrrha.
Ooh,
See?
from the beginning.
Yeah, we are getting back to them, they were relevant. Now, Deucalion had been told by Prometheus to build a box at the point when Zeus decided to flood the world. I'm not sure if this is just to do with Prometheus's foresight or if he was at this meeting and just slipped out early to give his son a tip-off, but who knows, maybe he was already chained up to the mountains at this point. This box was filled with all the food that Deucalion and Pyrrha needed to survive, and they set off inside it. For 9 days and 9 nights they were adrift in the box, eventually bobbing up to Parnassus and clambering out there. When they got out, Deucalion made an offering to Zeus, which is funny when you think that his dad was the one who actually told humanity how they should sacrifice in the first place.
Yeah.
Weeping, Deucalion and Pyrrha saw the destruction the world was subject to. Now, these two had always been good in contrast to everyone else, so I suppose it's a shame that Zeus didn't encounter them on his little travels. Maybe they were out shopping and missed him.
Yeah.
Now, Zeus resolved to spare these two, so he commanded the waters to recede. Poseidon therefore sounded a note in a conch, and the water drew back. The two came back down to the ground, and discussed how exactly they should repopulate the earth, because, well, there's no one left, it's just them. Eventually, they stumbled across the oracle at Delphi. I don't know how that survived the waves, given that, as far as I know, the oracle of Delphi is not floating in the sky, but who knows, maybe it's divine protection. The oracle told them to leave and chuck the bones of their mother behind them. This would be sacrilege given in what regard ancestors were held in, so you can't just throw your mum's bones behind you as you're walking. However, they thought about it, thinking that maybe literal interpretation was often not what was needed in the case of oracles and their pronouncements. Deucalion ultimately reasoned that maybe the utterance referred to the ground, as Gaia was the mother of everything, so it's not their literal mother, it is instead Gaia. This pronouncement of Gaia being the mother of all kind of forgets the other gods who came before her, I suppose, but hey. The main point is they've worked out the prophecy. So, they threw stones as they continued downwards. Rocks that Deucalion had handled became male, and rocks that Pyrrha had handled became female humans, so an innocent second wave of humanity was born from the ground.
Nice.
Apollodorus' version of events says that Zeus instead dispatched Hermes to the pair, which seems to be pretty much all he's doing at this point, going back and forth between people and or naming things.
Yeah, he likes naming things.
Yeah. He allowed them to wish for something, and Deucalion wished for people to come back. Zeus then told them to fling rocks over their heads, and the rest you know. In a similar trend, another version says that Zeus gifted the rocks to them, but ultimately the important point is not who exactly did what, but Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulated the earth using these rocks. It was after this that Deucalion and Pyrrha became parents to Helen, who we mentioned at the start of this episode.
Yeah.
So we'll take a little bit of time to talk a bit more about their family. Helen was, as I said, the namesake of the Greeks, or the Hellenes. He had sons Dorus and Aeolus, and grandsons Archias and Ion. These were the ancestors of 4 different people groups in ancient Greece. The Dorians, the Aeolians, Achaeans, and Ionians, so we see Greece kind of being formed here in a way. Helen might have been the son of Zeus, because of course he might have been.
Yeah.
The second son of Deucalion and Pyrrha was Amphictyon, who became king of a region called Attica, and Deucalion and Pyrrha also had a daughter called Protagonia, who later had a child by Zeus. He seems to crop up literally everywhere in this episode.
He does.
I think the story that Apollodorus gives us implies that Helen, their son, became ruler of Greece, because he splits it between his sons. One final thing to mention when it comes to connections to later mythological figures is that Dorus, if you remember the name I mentioned a little while ago, became the father of Sisyphus. Have you heard of Sisyphus? The man who is condemned in mythology to push a boulder up a hill in Hades forever.
Oh.
So this is the origin of the idea of something being Sisyphean, endless without any reward.
Okay.
Because this boulder keeps rolling back down the hill, so there's no reward to doing it. He doesn't get to finish the task. Just to finish us off here, Diodorus thinks that southern Egypt survived the flood because of its lack of rain. And my first instinct here is, of course he thinks that. Diodorus seems to think that Egypt is the answer to everyone's problems and the inventor of everything. If I remember correctly, he thinks that lots of Greek myths, including Heracles, were actually stolen from Egypt. With all of this behind us, we come to what I think is maybe the most fun/exciting part of this story. We might actually have a date for when all of this was meant to have happened.
Oh, nice.
I should be clear at this juncture, it is a mythological event, but still, we have something we can actually put on a timeline as a date for this random event. To know the date range, we have to turn to something called the Parian Marble. A thesis on the stela says that the flood of Deucalion is said to have happened in 1529 to 1528 BCE, although I disagree with this slightly, as we'll get to in a second. This same thesis gives dates for the Trojan War as between 1217 and 1208 BCE, and apparently Demeter came up with corn in 1409 BCE. So what exactly is this stela? This thing is a text which has historical events from 1582 BCE onwards with mythical kings all the way to 299 BCE. So it is a later thing found in Paros in the 1600s and again in the 1800s, which contains all these dates in an ordered chronology. It is claimed that the stele was engraved in 264 BCE. I had a look at the actual text myself, and I could only find it in Latin, but it does mention Deucalion, although the dates next to it appear to be counting downwards to something, so from a high number down towards 1. A quick visit to Google Translate, because I don't speak ancient Latin, tells me that the text refers to the ruler of Cranaau in Athens, so this is what the date itself actually mentioned. Supposedly, Deucalion had previously been a king at Lycoria, and his rule began in 1574 BCE, with the flood starting a few decades later in 1529. There is a different Christian source, which differs a little bit here, saying it's 1541 and 1527 BC for these dates, but as I said, it's a Christian source, so I'm more inclined to trust the former.
Why?
Well, because that is their actual mythology, whereas the Christian source Eusebius is looking back at this.
Very true.
However, we can do better than just looking at secondary sources for the dates. As I did, we can look at the text directly. There is a reference later on in the stela to Macedonia and Alexander son of Philip being born in 91 of this counting down chronology. Now, do you know who this might be, Alexander son of Philip?
Alexander the Great.
Yes, Alexander the Great, and we know when he was born. It's 356 BCE. Therefore, we can work backwards to the date given in the actual text as to when exactly this flood was meant to have happened according to the ancient Greeks. If we count backwards, if Alexander the Great is born in the year 91 of this arbitrary chronology, the flood is given in the year 1265. So according to my calculations, this is equivalent to about 1530 BCE. It is roughly the same as the date I gave earlier, but slightly different from the original text. So, what does this mean, the year 1530 BC? I'm assuming this doesn't mean a lot just as a number by itself.
No, what was on those at that point?
Well, at this time, Ahmose would have been ruling in Egypt, starting his rule in about 1550 and ending in 1525. Now, who is Ahmose? He is the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Egypt, which was the first dynasty to rule over the New Kingdom.
Goodness, already 18th dynasty?
Yep, we're already on the 18th because I think the first one started in about 3100 BC. Egypt is an old country.
It is. It's older than most of it.
Yeah. There are videos which I've seen before looking at when different countries arose, and Egypt is initially shown just on its own with no one else around it.
That's crazy.
But anyway, the 18th dynasty is also the one which contains Tutankhamun, so if you want a bit of a famous name to include in that, he is the ancestor, or the predecessor at least, of Tutankhamun, by about 200 years. This is because Tutankhamun is given a reign from 1336 to 1327 BCE by a particular web chronology I accessed, because there are different versions of these dates everywhere. This means we're about 200 years before the famous King Tut. If we want further confirmation of who exactly we're talking about as a pharaoh, Manetho, an ancient source, says the flood happened during the 26-year rule of a pharaoh called Misfragmathosis. This is clearly the Greeks coming up with a name for something that started in another language. But to my mind, this matches quite well to the 25 years and 4 months of Pharaoh Ahmose. So again, locking down, we are sometime in the 16th century BCE.
Nice.
That brings us to the end of our episode. Do you have any thoughts on it?
I quite enjoy it. It's nice to have real dates for an event that might be a myth.
Yeah, it's very exciting to think that the timeline section of our website might actually have a number way before I thought it would do.
Very true.
So, that, as I said, brings us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you all very much for listening. You can get in touch with us at our email address, autocratpodcast@gmail.com, or have a look at our website, www.autocratpodcast.wordpress.com, for things like our episodes, family trees, and timelines. And we're also on social media in the form of TikTok, where we are now uploading fragments of our backlog of episodes. So anything else you have to add on that?
Have a great week, everyone.
Yeah, have a great week. Fun story?
It was a very fun story.
Yeah. It's funny to think how Deucalion is the son of Prometheus, meaning he has a very close connection to the idea of sacrifice and